to episode 5 of Poetry Worth Hearing, the monthly poetry podcast magazine, hosted by me, Kathleen McPhillamy, and with music by Alex Heen. The text for the poems, background information about the poets, and everything else, including details of how to submit, can be found at poetryworthhearing.biz. This month's episode has 2 parts. We begin with a discussion of the rights and wrongs of writing poems about the conflict in Ukraine, followed by a short selection of poems relating to the war. The second part of the episode includes a variety of brilliant new poems and a short selection of poems recorded for us by Alan Buckley from his first collection, Touched. A group of about 12 poets, mostly from Oxford, got together on Zoom to discuss what they felt about writing poems about the war in Ukraine. More information about the participants can be found on the website. We divided the issue into 3 overlapping aspects: purpose, ethics, and quality. The first group considered the purpose of writing poetry about the war, given, in Auden's words, poetry makes nothing happen. The second group considered the different ethical issues: writing when you're not directly affected, partisanship, seeming to promote war, voyeurism, etc. The third group looked at the kinds of poetry that might be written and how form and style might be adapted to audience and what could be considered good or bad writing in this context. You'll hear the feedback from each group, followed by general discussion. Michael begins by reporting on purpose.
So we had a really interesting discussion about purpose and Ukraine. Jules started us off saying that there seems to be a bit of a tension between, do we have a right to something that we don't know much about in terms of subject matter versus the duty to bear witness. And she raised a very interesting point about how do you know you have a valid perspective. Andy then went into a very interesting point about that he doesn't write for now, but that he finds purpose by writing for future time, writing for his grandchildren. And that if he was to write a poem responding, he might do it in that way. The group thought that was a lovely idea and thought that that might be a way to create threads of different experience, to sort of weave things together like a blanket. Lou raised the point that she felt very uncomfortable about writing about things she doesn't know, a sense of imposter syndrome, and she brought up Grenfell, and she connected that to Ukraine and had a similar feeling on both counts of perhaps of imposter syndrome. And then Andy came back in and said that he wrote a poem about Grenfell and he was feeling quite nervous about it because it would offend people, but he stuck with it and thought that it was better, the poem was better for it. There was also, he raised the point of Seamus Heaney, and that Seamus Heaney apparently was once challenged during the Troubles, and I think an audience member challenged him and said, "Why didn't you write for us?" And Seamus Heaney said, "Well, I don't write for you, I write for me." And Andy was saying that his way into the Troubles was writing about the bog people, and we thought that was an interesting note on which to end. And Jules also said, just raised the question: do we have an obligation to bear witness? Do you always have to do that? Is that begging the question somewhat?
I just wanted to say that there's an entire genre about bearing witness, and again, it's Central American testimonial, and it is largely through the medium of war that this particular genre came out. With Claribel Gria's work, They Won't Take Me Alive, or Ashes of Itzalco, or something like that. So I think you've got a twinning between witness and war, but also the sense that there's an obligation sounds uncomfortably to me like privilege. But then,
aren't we all?
We are all speaking here from a position of largely white, middle class or higher educated Western European, or transatlantic in my case. And as that, we are more secure. We live on an island, so we believe that we're the people to whom things don't happen, that we are secure, that we are safe. And obligation, it's like the old sense of noblesse oblige, the idea that, and it's not the oblige that I'm querying, it's the question of whether we have the right to the noblesse.
I think it's what Andy said when we were in our group, really, was the fact that if you can write about it, it will be from your own perspective. It won't be from their perspective. But if enough people write from it from different perspectives, then you're going to get this, like we were saying, a blanket, a weave of lots of different voices that are going to give you a far truer picture than if you just have one side, say, or Ukrainians or all Russians writing about their experiences. From a viewer's perspective, it's totally different. And so maybe that's as valid as the Ukrainian or the Russian side or whoever's involved in a war, because then you get a whole picture rather than just. And I'm really find it very difficult to write about anything other than what I know about. So, but I do think that thinking about it now and having had that talk, I feel more inclined to write about it than I did before, because I think that with that weave that Andy was saying about and writing for the future, then different voices will give it a different colour.
Hannah.
Yeah, I agree with what you said, Jules, and I think it is valid what you said, Jen, about our privilege, but on the other hand, what we do share, whatever colour, background, etc., is we're all humans, and I think we've all got the capacity for empathy. So it's a risk to write about the situation you don't have direct experience of, but if we can only literally write about what we have direct experience of, mine, at the moment would be very limited. I've come quite a long way thanks to Kathleen putting this on, because at first I felt completely inhibited about writing because I felt, no, it's not fair to kind of write about somebody's terrible suffering when I have no direct experience of it and I'm so safe here. But now I feel much more opened up to there are many ways, as Jules said, the more we can feed in, it'll be a much richer picture overall. It's not one poet, it's thousands of people writing.
Michael.
I had a bit of an unorthodox perspective, which I raised in the group. I mean, people talk about rights and privileges and perspectives, but if the poem's good, I think the purpose ultimately, surely, of any poem from any perspective is to be good. We can debate what a good poem is, but if we're all striving to write good poems, that's surely the ultimate test, isn't it? I mean, when you read something from 100 years ago, I don't think you're wondering about how powerful this person was or their privilege. I mean, you might do if you get some in-depth biographical information about it, but I mean, those aren't, I think, the first questions that you raise when you immediately read a truly great poem or poem that resonates with you. It's maybe the feeling or the which gets you. I don't know.
Shall we move on to group 2? Is that you, Bill?
Yeah, we had a complex discussion. Even in the short time, different things came out. So we started off with an anecdote from Jen about her great-grandparents who left Ukraine before the First World War, I think, harried out of Ukraine essentially by pogrom. Despite that, the grandparents continued to visit Ukraine fleetingly up to 1915. So what this did for us straight away was to get us grounded in the complexity of Ukraine, relations with Russia, and all these things we can't possibly understand. And then we had a very strong and good challenge from Merin, who explained very clearly her reasons for all her doubts about writing poetry to do with Ukraine and indeed with some other topics where ethics are very much in play. She made it clear that her reservations are to do with her great knowledge of the poetry of the First World War and her knowledge about how you might call the poets who wrote with authority on the First World War, who'd actually served, been close to it, the suffering, had suffered, felt about the kind of fake poets of the First World War who were got up by the newspapers and public opinion to beat the patriotic drum. I'm adding a few more words of my own here because Marion, as you can guess, was far more restrained and lucid about the whole thing. But I think she was raising the issue of hypocrisy here. However, she did feel that there were some good, strong counterexamples. Some of the poetry about post 9/11, I think she quoted, and also a poem of her own about young lovers separated by war. And this is interesting because we're now getting towards one of the keystones of ethical writing in poetry, which is writing from your own experience or something you have sound knowledge of, possibly extrapolating from it. Jen came back and reminded us of a quotation from Margaret Atwood, which concluded, "We lived in the gap between the stories," which I think is a reminder that the problem of dealing with a huge emotive subject like the war in Ukraine is that we only see such a small little bit of what's going on. Now, Lizzie, on the other hand, said that she'd found herself in a situation where she had not been able to avoid writing about violence and war because she'd started her student years in Derry in 1968, and the Troubles had led to her writing poems about what was going on, which she felt were not necessarily very good, but she felt she had to write them. So that here there is some compulsion of the poet. The poet is not always in control of what poet is writing. Then we came back to ethics being the study of what is good, what is a good response to any particular challenge. And an advantage of poetry is it's a way of exploring the poet's feelings about what is good. If poet's feelings are well grounded, the result may well be tolerable to good poetry. If the poetry is complete rubbish, it's perhaps an indication that the poet needs to rethink. So you've got here the idea of poetry possibly as a learning tool, both for the poet and for the readers. And Jen again raised the idea of poetry as a coping mechanism. So part of the right response to any very powerful issue is to cope with it. And poetry may offer a way of doing this. And she spoke about a magazine, Rattle, which offers the choice to write about such violent subjects, but you have to write within 7 days. And we thought that was a useful discipline. So we've got the idea of ethics and ethical writing in poetry as a challenge, which comes at us for all sorts of reasons, is sometimes not even possible to avoid, but we obviously clearly thought there's a need for a discipline to guide us.
When we say we're not involved, I think one of the things that I have felt is terror because of the nuclear threat.
I think it scared me more when I found out that Finland and Sweden were no longer going to be neutral, because I'm thinking, well, if they think it's such a threat that they're actually going to join NATO, then this sounds like an escalation rather than a country a long way away that is having an argument and it won't affect us. Somehow it all of a sudden felt more, not real, but more threatening.
My sister-in-law is Finnish and she wants to join NATO now, but
I just want to say, funny enough, I was in a meeting earlier today where there was a Swedish and a Norwegian, a poetry meeting, a Swedish and Norwegian lady, and both of them are very keen, especially the Norwegian, because they share borders with Russia. And I have family both in Sweden and Finland, and everybody wants to be in NATO. And I remember as a child going on holiday to Finland, and we could see the Soviet U-boats just like sharks in the waters around the archipelago. So it's always been very, very real that these are fairly small countries with small populations living alongside a giant bear.
Can I say something? We all have distinct experiences. And I personally don't want to write about the situation in Ukraine. I don't think I can find a way to do that. And what I'm about to say now is not irrelevant, but perhaps surprising. I was a teenager during the Cuban Missile Crisis. I have been there before. And that was a crisis which was resolved. And this is partly what worries me, politically, not poetically. That was resolved by very, very skillful diplomacy. And in the present crisis, that experience influences my thinking and will appear in the way I write about conflict or about politics or whatever. So I'm sort of just putting in a word that I do feel individual and distinct, and I don't feel I'm privileged in an old-fashioned sense. I'll own up to that, but I don't feel privileged in having lived through the Cuban Missile Crisis. It just is part of who I am.
Thank you, Andrew. Can we go on to group 3, please?
Yeah, I can say a bit. We had a very good discussion, and what really came out of it was that it's quite difficult to separate the three, the why, the ethics, and the quality. And Anna very much said that we should always aim to write the best poetry we possibly can. It's not a question of dropping the quality by any means. And we discussed a bit whether or not, if you imagine that you're writing for an audience that maybe isn't so into poetry as we are all here, whether you would find certain forms might be quite appealing to maybe do more rhyming than you maybe necessarily do, and so on. We didn't come to any kind of this is what you do prescription, but we just discussed how form can also maybe help you contain the emotion, but really to always aim to write the best quality. But we actually talked a lot about ethics one way or another. I think that's the big central theme here. And also Anna told us a bit about her own Ukrainian background.
You know, you're saying about form does help, puts it in perspective. And also I found that the one I've written, I wrote right early on when it first was happening. And now I would tone down the emotion. I tried not to have too much emotion in it, but because we all feel emotional, you know, it's a given. But we aren't there. We aren't them. We can, as we were saying, we can only do it for our own perspective. But if you get 1,000 poems, you're going to get 1,000 perspectives. So out of that, there will be different quality, and you could be judged like that. And also later on, when people from Ukraine maybe are more part of us, other poems will come from them, and it might help them. So it will be interesting to see how that might help, because sometimes the poetry might comfort a bit, like Anna was thinking, I think.
I was going to ask Anna how she felt as a Ukrainian seeing people who are not Ukrainian or involved writing about what's happening.
I can understand the problems that exist, because for me, I felt very personally affected by what started happening. I was depressed, in fact, for a good long while. And it felt a very personal thing for me to have the country that my parents had come from. I was born in this country, to have it invaded. And it seemed as if the old problem of Russia and Ukraine's relationship with Russia is still the same. It still hasn't been resolved. They're still the old enemy, I'm afraid, from a Ukrainian point of view. That, you know, they see, but these days they seem to see Ukrainians as an even greater threat, to the point of wanting to deny the actual existence of such a group of people as Ukrainians. You know, it's an existential war, because they want to deny Ukraine the right to exist as an independent country, as an independent entity, rather than just seeing it as part, you know, south of Russia, as part of Russia. So a lot of my responses the poems have materialized from have been a response to what I've seen from a very personal point of view. But it's also been an attempt to identify with the people involved. So I've written about I'm not going to read that poem tonight, but I have written a poem about 4 women in the east of Ukraine who spend their whole day sitting what seemed to be in almost silence in a bunker, while the war goes on around them. And the poem was an attempt to identify with each of those and what might be going on inside their minds. So whether it's good poetry or not, I kind of came back to the old question of form and language, that form as a constraining and restraining feature of poetry can help us not become over sentimental or rant and rave. You know, you have to respect the boundaries of your art, and you have to write with a certain degree of detachment as well. I thought that was important. So that's something I've aspired to do, and to edit and re-edit the poem. So we felt that in the end, quality was based on what we see as being good poetry, and that applies still in war poetry and writing about Ukraine as well. So we judge it by the same principles, is what we were trying to say, I think, or what I was trying to say.
So that was the very edited version of our discussion. Now we have the poems. We begin with Jennifer A. McGowan reading a poem by the Ukrainian poet Dmitry Bliznyuk, who's writing in Kharkiv.
Walls trembling like horses. The sounds grow. They are the teeth of a vehemently rotating circular saw. And the bomber folds the sky like a book, cuts the sky in two, and you, seized with terror, shrivel up into I, into we, like into a lifeboat sent by God, but you are too big to squeeze in. Quickly and rudely, you cover your mom with your body. Your stunned guardian angel blindly thumps its wings against linoleum like an albatross on the deck. Where are you? Are you still here? Still alive? My dear people. The sky bursts with explosions. The sky gets filled with pink manganese solution, the oblong eyes of the beast of the horizon. It's the trepidation of the despairing city with pneumatic picks. The walls of your house tremble like horses that caught the smell of a wolf. And that's by Dmitry Bliznyuk and translated by Sergei Gerasimov.
And our first poem is from Lizzie Ballacher, who makes remarkable and very effective use of rhyme.
This is the first time I've read this poem aloud, but I wrote it for the stage rather than the page. I belong to the Mid-Kent stanza, and the challenge of the fortnight was to write a sestina. I think I failed completely. I ended up with a cross between a sestina and a rap. So here it is. And it's called simply Now. No more days of high elation. Gone is the chance for deliberation. Old friends now fall to altercation as men are trapped in alienation. So no more thought of hesitation. This is the day of preparation. No more time for conversation. Generals meet in excitation. Towns are hot with expectation. Now is the week of confrontation, while streets are filled with automation, all in the name of denazification. While women stare in consternation, clanking tanks cause desolation. Crabbed madmen crow in exultation. The press pours scorn and denigration on conscripts caught in exploitation. Yes, war's a cruel aberration. No longer friendly salutation. Speakers fail in explanation. Without a time of recreation, poets cease their recitation. All artists lose their inspiration. Enemies act sans limitation. Now cities fall to ruination. Ukraine risks full annihilation. Its people face extermination. Their mothers loud in lamentation watch sweet homes in conflagration, in falling buildings devastation. When is the day of reparation in shouted words, dire obfuscation, in nightly missiles, fulmination? Where is the place of consultation, of hope and peace, conciliation, of simple trust, collaboration? Lies, only lies, no verification. Wars made an excuse for eradication. So now save this sovereign nation.
Our next poet, Anna Avebury, is Ukrainian, although she was born in the UK.
This poem arose out of a meditation in response to the bombing of Kharkiv. Kharkiv is the second city of Ukraine, and it's a cultural centre. It had many universities, an opera house, a theatre, and they were all devastated. And I couldn't bear to see this wanton destruction of such a special place. You know, it really is a tragedy to have lost all those institutions and the life that went on there. So this is Kharkiv, Ash Wednesday, 2022. What will remain when the dust settles on the rubble, graveyard of truth, and wailing sirens yowl their peace? Where will they find themselves, emerging from underground shelters, shaken, sleep-starved, hungry? The world they knew, familiar sights incinerated in a flash of missile strike, cluster bomb tirade. Uneasy silence reigns. Is it safe? They carry their heavy hearts in bruised caskets, stumble over boulders and stones, lintels and ceilings draped over the road. A teddy bear lies abandoned. The pages of a book turn in the wind. Ragged cries fill the air.
The next poet is Andrew Dixon.
This poem is not directly about the crisis in Ukraine. It's a reflection on autocracy. Walpole. He said they must be punished. They defied. Our name is ours, they said. And he replied, I'll punish you for that. They were fortified by faith that right was on their side. So did this whirlpool of insanity gain strength. All those who watched it grow at length drawn into it. What words to speak? What actions take? Bewildered, spinning, cursing him.
And now, Sarah MacLeod.
In Ukraine, swallows have a strong homing instinct. I hear a prayer in the tread of tanks. As they flatten borders, their ridges print earth into possession orders. A bridge is a prayer, the colour of smoke. Amen is the end of a prayer, and yet Z is not the end of the alphabet. I hear prayers in clangs of masonry as it holds a building in its arms, in the crump as it falls. Hear a small bird of a girl sing, let it go, can't hold it back anymore, like a wound opening its door.
Next, we have Merrin Williams with a reflection on war, past and present.
Just after the Ukraine war broke out, my friend Ruth Bidgood died. She was a wonderful poet and lived to be almost 100 years old. To Ruth. You told me how, in 1941, you walked with your boyfriend quietly through Port Meadow, not far from Thames, and watched the nesting moorhens, not talking much, not asking what came next. You vowed you'd write. You did exchange long letters and he survived, but married someone else. And now it's 2022 and war again, not that it ever stopped or will. I see them, lovers, clinging to each other in tears before just one gets on the train. The young men not allowed to cross the border and time winds back. The scene is just the same. Two students walk, him with his call-out papers, and you, a girl the age of Sophie Scholl, across a field of memory, and it darkens, and I remember, though your light grows frail.
Inga Milful was unable to join our discussion, but in this poem she reflects the qualms many feel in writing about the war.
This poem does nothing much. If I just started walking to Mariupol, a bag of bread loaves in my left, a 6-pack of clean water in my right, if I stood facing the Russians, saying to the soldiers, "Go home. Look at yourself. Think of your mother. Think of your mother," my grandmother said to the Russian soldier who did not rape her, because he had listened to what she said, but he was not an army. If we all started walking, everyone, if we stood all of us between the army and Mariupol with our bare hands, would they not stop shooting eventually? At least run out of ammunition. How long could they continue thinking it is we who are the enemy? I think this has been tried, and the answer is too long. Whoever walks to Mariupol must be prepared to shatter those who are in Mariupol. Bodies, lives, dreams, minds. If I were to walk to Mariupol, I should have started walking decades ago. For there are other places like Mariupol, more than one, too many. I will not walk to Mariupol. I have weak ankles. I am very afraid of the things people do to other people. Mariupol, I wept for you. My tears were nothing, mere dishwater.
Here is another very powerful poem by Hannah Busk-Nielsen, but this one was written in 2015, after the Russians first invaded Ukraine.
This poem was written 7 years ago, but is tragically relevant today. It is a response to a photograph in a newspaper reporting on the first invasion of Ukraine, and I offer it tentatively as an inadequate attempt at witnessing. Moja Molenka Donetska, Kramatorsk, 11th of February 2015. Moja Malenka Donetska, my little daughter. It was not working late, not the long queues, not the snow, not a cancelled train, not a broken bridge. Not that I forgot why I must stay here on the rough ice-patched grass outside the railway station, where I always crossed to our street, where everyone walks home in the evening. Why I must stay here now, my boots resting, my face covered with newspaper by a stranger.
And finally, Jennifer A. McGowan reads her own poem.
This poem was written before I saw the news about the endemic racism amongst people running the evacuations, who would not let Africans, students in the Ukraine, board the evacuation buses. Ukrainians only, they were told. But before then, I saw a picture of a Ukrainian soldier wearing a mask whilst helping people flee. Holy cow, I thought. It's a literal war zone, and here he has the consideration to mask up. And then the news about the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida struck, and the denial of trans rights in Texas. Evacuating Mariupol by Jennifer A. McGowan. The soldier who has lain planks to cross the water because they blew up the bridge. The one whose language has become ammunition. The one who helps Mama Natalia across because they can see her ankle is dodgy. That soldier who went to school with Dmitri and helped him with his English homework, who now lifts your dog over that last ditch because it has a broken leg, but the vet is dead. That same soldier who cradles the baby in their arms, humming it to sleep. Even they, in the thick of it, wear a surgical mask, because death has many guises, and they may live in a city no longer on the map. But at least it's not Florida or fucking Texas.
Part 2. Now we come to the more general section of the podcast, and we start with a very strong poem by Brighid Schroer.
Damage. It must be the girl's fault. Look at what she was wearing, and how she moved. She was asking for it. Slut. I haven't told anyone except my sisters, but everybody knows. He's been boasting. They say I'm damaged goods, and worse. They can't bear to look me in the eye, it seems. My sisters are the only ones who stand by me. What did she think she was doing anyway, going off with an older man? He took her down behind the sheds, down there where they clean the fish. She must have wanted it. I should never have agreed to meet him. I was stupid. I'd even heard something of his reputation, but I thought I'd be all right. He was my dad's friend, almost an uncle. We all come from the same area, down by the docks. I hate myself. So hurt. So hurt. I'm all screwed up inside. His hands on me, the terror, oh God. And he wouldn't stop, though I screamed, then pleaded. And he hurt me. I said, "You're hurting me." He just went on. Well, I've been punished, all right. No one blames the man. But look at me now. I'm ugly. It's how I feel, anyway. Hideous. And oh, my beautiful hair hangs tangled now in greasy ropes. Everyone says I'm a monster, but I'm the monster rape has made. Men fear and loathe me. It's only a matter of time till someone tries to kill me. Some hero. Handsome, no doubt. A real heartthrob. Someone like Perseus. But he'll be afraid. He won't dare look at me. I'll turn him to stone.
Completely different, Carl Tomlinson's two poems reflect on art, high art, and the industrial artisanship and skill in the finish of buildings.
Art. 2 hours into Tate Modern, I've got to the I could have done that stage. In my defence, we've just watched a film of a bloke with no keks gyrating round a plastic T-Rex. I've been to those parties. Forgive me. I digress. I stare through the window, soothe myself with the Thames, and spurred by idle habit, check the finish on the curtain wall. Pearlescent silver, mirror flat, the fleck completely uniform. No orange peel, no build-up at the edge. No brown. Heavy sections like this need extra heat. Too much can scorch the flake. I could not have done this. In 30 years I peeled, pre-treated, jigged. I tested panels in the lab. Once I crashed a van. I quoted, schmoozed and sealed some deals. I hired and fired, my word held sway. Finally, too tired to stay, I had to walk away. But I never learnt to spray. Deposits. When my pamphlet publisher tells me she'll send a copy to the British Library, I grin. I'm beside myself that copyright will hide my name in gloomy stacks where, let's face it, it's going to gather dust. Like the anonymous presence of my colleagues and me in that ageing skin of brick red paint, clinging to soffits and louvers cladding this barrack facade, which has me beside myself again as I wander down Euston Road.
Now here is Sue Johns with 2 poems, which in different ways are about trees.
I'd like to read 2 poems from my pamphlet Rented, both inspired by trees. The first one was the result of a visit to South Africa, where I learnt about something called hormonal sentience, the way in which trees and plants can communicate with each other. Hormonal sentience, bushwalk, South Africa. Trees are telling tales, murmuring to the neighbours in ethylene, to fill their leaves with tannin, make themselves distasteful to hungry browsers. Trees speak, as they did when man's mimicry was all but animal, in the days of stone shapes and fire miracles, when language rolled in with the wheel. Mapani trees added their tongue to the clicking consonants of Khoisan, the long Dutch vowels, when the first ship anchored at the Cape and unloaded its cargo of dubious futures. Acacia trees wept with the abolitionists, mused on the passing of mules and wagons, the death of each warrior, every red-coated column, and debated the true price of gold. Trees in yellow-flowered frocks gossiped and prayed each summer long, sang anthems, cast their ballots in the breeze as freedom was islanded in the time of monochrome. Trees with rebel pheromones collude at sunrise, when shots ring from the mines and each thrumming shanty surrenders its contents to the needs of the sparkling towns. And the second poem came out of seeing a sign in a local park when there'd been a spate of people getting dogs to attack trees as a way of training them to fight. The sign read as follows: "There has been a number of instances of criminal damage to trees in this park, caused by dog owners training certain breeds to attack trees. Trees are now dying as a result of this." Cur. Do you miss the bird song from the crabapple? Remember the confetti from the hawthorn and cherry proclaiming spring before the mastiffs strip them bare. I have packed away the picnic rug, the wicker basket and the paper cups, since the hounds took to hunting the ash and the elm under which we shared sandwiches and wine. I knew when the lapdogs came, out from under the skirts of dowagers, jumping and swinging from the burnished branches, there would be no more chestnuts on the fire. And by the time you read this. The bull terriers will have warred with the holly and mistletoe. There will be no greening of mantles this Christmas. Our kisses will flounder under distressed pine.
You can find details about Sue's books on the website poetryworthhearing.biz. Our next poet is David Cooke with 2 elemental poems.
I'm going to read poems from a collection that I'm preparing publication at the moment. It's called The Metal Exchange, and it started off as a sequence of poems inspired by specific metals and whatever it was they happened to suggest to me. And then gradually, as the sequence developed, I went off into all sorts of strange areas, scientific or historical, or just sometimes had a bit of fun. One of the themes that comes up in quite a few poems in this forthcoming collection is the classical notion of the ages of man, starting off from the age of gold, the age of silver, and then through the age of brass and the age of iron, when everything had gone to pot. So this poem is called The Age of Gold, and it's placed in the context of childhood. The Age of Gold. Imagine a world where pester power rarely delivers the goods, and a dawdling hike to school's the norm. You have fresh air, your friends, and a small coin burning a hole in your pocket. Spend it now, or do your best to make it last the week. In class, Rosanna Ferrario likes to sit beside you. All the others make you blush. They seem to know you like her too. Give her a love heart with your message, so at least she'll learn it's true, even though the taste is sour. Your best friend Jan eats salami. How can anyone like that stuff? Does he like bacon boiled with cabbage? The day you both forget the milk, singing Beatles songs, Mr. Murphy canes you to help you mend your ways. This one goes back to the ancient theory of the 4 elements and plays around with them. The title of the poem is Thales, who is reckoned to be the first Greek philosopher, although he had more in common with what we would consider to be primitive science rather than philosophy. And the early Greek philosophers or scientists wanted to know what was the main ingredient of matter. Was there an element or a substance from which everything else came? And for Thales, this was water. And this poem has got a little epigraph which isn't from Thales, it's from Aristotle, sort of summarizing what Thales thought. So this is Thales. The permanent entity is water. As elements are meant to, earth, air, or fire appear true to themselves. The dull ground we've charted, tilled, scarred, or wasted, to cornfield, battlefield, desert, seems solid enough. While always invisibly there, the air is soft or wild for as long as lungs can breathe it. Confined to a hearth, the fire seeks escape, its horde of sparks despising verticals. Only water tames it, that soothes and then deceives, the veiled source of everything. Brought to a halt at the edge of its world, the bear scans unswimmable distance. One day, for water, we'll tear ourselves apart.
Now, Meg Barton offers some sour sweet Reflections.
Chemistry lesson. A damp shared flat in Streatham. Sad wallpaper, dark green, and Leonard Cohen on the gramophone, on endless loop for someone's broken heart. Above the rust-stained bath, an Ascot water heater, the pilot light gone out. And I, the only one to volunteer to strike a match to light it. And so I find myself, no eyelashes or eyebrows, but alive. Indignant, though, to find the science I'd avoided when at school was waiting here in London's chilly heart. Sunday morning, London. I'm walking the pavements alone for something to do, past the little shaded cafes where we did not sit, down streets we've never quarrelled in or kissed, Victorian houses we have never just moved into and painted together a daring feature wall, pausing only to make love on our new kitchen island, past the theatres we've never rushed to, and all the parks where we've never wandered hand in hand. Where are you, my future lover? Speak to me from London's dismal acres dun and grey. Console me now. One day we'll laugh at this, you'll see. And turning in bed sometime, I'll idly say, I roamed the streets and tried to call your name. And you, my love, I did the very same. The date. The afternoon in the art gallery might of course lead on to other things. The eventual requirement to remove your clothes, end up as naked as the paintings on the wall. No longer the safety of your duffel coat or conversation, and in spite of all your preparation, he will find out about your bulgy thighs, your waist that's hardly there, deficiencies you've seen before reflected in the mirror of the changing room. And so you brace yourself and hope and pray he won't run screaming from the bed. The tragic loss, the end of everything. Perhaps, oh God, perhaps the guy won't mind. Won't mind. Out in the miracle morning afterwards, he didn't mind. What's more, he'd like to do it all again, and so would you. You turn each moment over. He even wants to paint you, draw each limb and line of you again, just as you traced each other all last night.
Finally, we have a short selection of poems recorded for us by Alan Buckley. Alan is an Oxfordshire poet with a growing reputation who read for the Oxford Stanza 2 open mic event in March. He is reading from his first collection, Touched. Details on the website.
As is the case with many first collections of poetry, there are a number of poems in Touched that were written quite a long time ago. And one of the oldest is this one, Cowley Road, 3:30 p.m, which was first drafted in July 2005. And then a version of it appeared in my first pamphlet, Shiver, in 2009. There's a character who appears in it that I think I need to explain a bit about. So a friend of mine, Stephen Hancock, was in his early 20s a peace activist. And on the eve of the First Gulf War, he broke into the United States Air Force Base at Upper Heyford and disabled an F-111 fighter jet, for which he was sent to prison. So thereafter, he was also a DJ, and his DJing name was DJ Aeroplane Man. Cowley Road, 3:30 p.m. Rumours of further bombs start filtering through, like the first skin splashes before a storm breaks. The screen reloads. London paralysed by fear. I notice my chest beginning to tighten. I leave the office. In front of the clearance shop opposite Tesco, the three of us meet by chance. Me, the dancer, the aeroplane man who once disabled an F-111 with a hammer. There's just so much to discuss. The best place to get your bicycle repaired, dress code at forthcoming weddings, the amount of drugs consumed at a recent festival. Smiles are easy doves fluttering round our heads, and we could stand here all day if we wanted. The air is hot, thick with fumes, but I breathe in deeply and try to feel my feet on the ground. We part. I cycle down Cowley Road, mindful of the oncoming buses as they swing out to avoid the parked cars. It's a glorious July afternoon. Anything might happen. So, in my parallel life, when I'm not writing or poems or thinking about poetry, I'm a psychotherapist. I have been for many years. One of the questions I still often get asked is how I do it without getting emotionally involved with the people that I'm working with, which I think is a really intriguing question in terms of what lies behind that question. You know, what is the speaker really trying to find out? Anyway, this poem is my response to that question, and it features a couple of performers called Penn and Teller, who, according to Wikipedia, are American magicians, entertainers, and scientific skeptics who have performed together since the late 1970s. They are noted for their ongoing act that combines elements of comedy with magic. So, this poem is called Psychotherapy. Summer of '86. Still a student before the wilderness years of my 20s, the groping towards a career, and me and a friend had blagged our way to New York. We saw them perform off-Broadway, Penn all spiel and patter, Teller his mute sidekick. Back then it was novel, deconstructing magic in front of an audience. To close the show, Penn delivered a monologue on eating fire. How do you not burn your mouth? That was what people always asked him. And his big reveal was this: there is no trick. You do burn your mouth, especially to begin with. What's more, each time you do the act, you swallow some lighter fluid. It makes you nauseous, slowly poisons your liver. No matter. His explanation just deepened my sense of wonder. He paused as if to gather his thoughts, then shifted his gaze, and I swear his eyes were focused on mine. Magic is fake. Sideshow skills are real. You shouldn't ask how we're doing this, but why. For the past 7.5, almost 8 years, I've worked for a refugee charity in Oxford as a psychotherapist. And not surprisingly, a large number of the people we work with are people who have fled civil war. But amongst those, there are those who were not simply civilians, but actually bore arms in those wars. And their stories are, I think, more complicated. This poem is about them, and it has an epigraph by the writer Hisham Matar. Civil war is a national crisis and also a private trauma. We suffer it collectively and in isolation. Surrender. The men whose stories I've listened to today have known how it feels to be half human, half automaton, a rifle stock jammed in their armpit, trigger finger applying precisely not quite the pressure required. They've known how it feels to stride towards a body that might or might not belong to an innocent bystander, a body they scan, watching for a hint of movement. They wonder, as I do, how they'll be healed when here and now is also there and then. Their stony vigilance seems as though it'll never end, and I've no words to disarm them. It's 7:40 p.m. and I'm swimming. The shower's just cleared and the river's surface fractures the low sun. Come join me, men. Drop your ammunition belts and strip off your fatigues. Dive in. Let your floating prove you're more than stone and can be held, borne by water as we all were once. Feel its pull, the stubborn tenderness that will, in time, wear down the sharpest edge. Above us, sliding raindrops find the tips of leaves. Each one trembles, as if it mourns the self it has to lose. Then it surrenders to the fall, and there's nothing but light and flow. This poem is in part influenced by the Sharon Olds poem I Go Back to May 1937, and it was written in response to the final photograph in my parents' wedding album. The Error. They're standing like figures on a cake by a pre-war Hillman minx. My father, stiff as the mannequin his suit was lifted from, has a pleasantly startled expression, as if he can't quite believe he's got to this threshold, beyond which adult life begins. My mother's hiding behind her lipstick smile, the blinding white of her dress. They think they've found a way out, and here's the car that will take them away to a housing estate that's still being built, to earth that's yet to be dug over to make a vegetable patch, to a life untethered from its past. They're wrong, of course. I'm witness to how their histories followed them out of this frame. But look, here's where I'll choose to say I come from, that small place of reassurance that something else is possible, the warm hollow made by their locked hands.
And that's it for episode 5. I hope you enjoyed listening and that you will recommend the podcast to your friends. Remember, text of poems and lots of useful information can be found on poetryworthhearing.biz. Keep on sending in your recordings, not more than 4 minutes, to poetryworthhearing@gmail.com.